Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw. Okay, so yeah, I don't know. Look, it could be a poster. It could be a promotional poster. It could be the jacket of a book or a cover. I'm not really sure, but it says at the top. Well, it's the image of a kind of feminine, elvish. It's very sci-fi, super sci-fi, of somebody standing on what looks like it could be a tusk coming out of the water. It's very. Maybe not, maybe a tongue. Some weird kind of curled thing. This elven kind of person standing on it. The light is very kind of ethereal moonscape. In the far background is like a kind of an exposed moon, half, or a crescent moon sort of style. They're shooting stars. It says volume 40. The best news and fantasy short stories of the year. Yes, nice. L. Ron Hubbard presents Writers of the Future. 15 illustrated short stories, bonus stories, plus art and writing tips. Is your name? There are 4 or 5 names there, edited by Jody Lynn Nye. Okay, we're on this. What's this, Lance?
So, Writers of the Future is a contest that's been running for 40 years.
Wow.
I submitted a story to it last year. They judge the winners every quarter, so like the contest is quarterly.
Okay.
So I won first place in one of the quarters last year in 2023.
Nice.
And the top 3 finishers in each quarter have their stories included in the Writers of the Future anthology. So I've got a short story coming out in Writers of the Future Volume 40 in I think about 3 weeks from now is when the book gets released.
Respect.
And this is the book cover.
That's great. What riches and glory comes along with this beyond being published?
So the Writers of the Future contest, like for the 12 winners, it's just this amazingly generous contest. They fly us out to Los Angeles.
Oh, wow.
And there's a Los Angeles connection in the art on this cover that I'll talk about in a second. But they fly us out to Los Angeles, and we've got a week-long workshop taught by some of the top names in science fiction and fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
So one of those is Robert J. Sawyer, fellow Canadian science fiction writer. He's one of the 2 lead instructors, and a few other big names in science fiction teach this course. A little bit on the business of writing, a little bit on marketing, a bit on the craft of writing, and so on. But yeah, a week long on this course, and then we've got the award ceremony at the end of the week. Of the 4 from each of the 4 quarters, the first place finishers, one of those 4 stories would be selected as the overall grand prize winner.
Oh, nice.
And, so yeah,
Okay, so look, I see the name L. Ron Hubbard. I, of course, celebrated writer, but also celebrated, some would call him a kook. The fact that you're going down to California, do I need to worry about you?
I'm not expecting I'll come back wearing a tinfoil hat or anything. Now, to be honest, so a lot of the people associated with the behind the contest are connected with Scientology.
Mm-hmm.
But the contest itself, like the writers who teach, the judges who judge the contest, are not. They're people with no particular connection to Scientology, other than they're connected to this contest, and the publisher, has a lot of the staff of the publishing company are Scientologists. But I mean, that was one of the things I checked out when I entered the contest. I wanted to see, what is this I'm getting into?
Yeah.
And it was pretty clear. This is a legit contest with, and not just the judges and the instructors in the course, but people who've won the contest in the past. Again, people with no particular connection to that movement or that religion, whatever you call it. Some of them have, after winning this contest, have then gone on to very successful careers in science fiction and fantasy.
Amazing.
And this contest was like an early milestone in their careers.
So okay, so I don't know the world of Lance Robinson. And look, your name is so memorable. It's like it's basically it's like made for it just really rolls off the tongue. So do you have like how large is the corpus of your work? Like do you have because for example, I once had a Mercedes Lackey, right? I think that's her name, Mercedes Lackey. And it turns like we were talking, and it turns out she's written something like 400 novels. And I was like, what? So, who am I talking to, Lance? Like, okay, what's the body of your work?
So, yeah, nothing like that. I've written a couple novels that are sitting in drawers, and haven't looked at them in a long time. I think if I go back and look at them again, they were written years ago when I was just starting out in my early days. I think if I went back and looked at them, I'd either decide it needs a lot of work or it's not worth working on. Most of my focus has been on short stories. I took a big hiatus in writing science fiction. I was writing in the late '80s and the '90s and early 2000s, but I gradually faded away from it. Had a family, had kids, moved to Kenya. Like after I did my PhD, ended up moving back there and lived there for 7 years.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, shifted continents, filled up part of my when I wasn't spending time with my kids. So I had different kind of community work I was doing. So for just various reasons, I shifted away from it. When I moved back to Canada about 4 years ago, that's when I said, no, I want to get back at this. I miss this. There's something. There's an itch I need to scratch,
Mm-hmm.
and so I started writing again. And I don't know if it was life experience or just the having some distance from having done it in the past or what it was, but the writing has been going so much better since then. So yeah, I've got a story coming out soon in Analog magazine, as I mentioned. It's coming out next month. I've got a story coming out in Writers of the Future. Back in the '80s and '90s, when I was first publishing short stories in different small press magazines and so on, I had about five or six short story publications.
Mm.
I've got a few other short stories I've written in the past couple of years, are making the rounds, trying to find a magazine or an anthology or someone to publish them. And starting to work on a novel now.
For people who where it's like switches, right? So like the switches of science fiction, for some people, yes, that just kind of really does it for them. And for some people, absolutely not. It's just like whatever, doesn't really connect. How about you talk about what is it about science fiction specifically that because it's really interesting because when you first start talking about the sky, right? You were talking about like in the first photo, you're talking about possibility, right? It's like there's this notion of possibility, of potential, and to a certain extent, there's an optimism about it, right? So the optimism of science fiction, although some science fiction is quite, let's say, pessimistic, but why don't you talk about how optimism informs your worldview, I guess.
Sure. And I think, recently, I think a lot of the science fiction we see, and I might look at kinds of stuff that are coming out on Netflix these days, a lot of it is pretty bleak and apocalyptic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the world needs some hope now. And I think it needs some imagination. One novel that I was really impressed with was Kim Stanley Robinson's Ministry of the Future. And again, that was my understanding from interviews I've read with him, and it fits with what I've read of his novel, is he felt this need to present, not in like a intellectual argument, but in an art form, present the idea that as bleak and scary as climate change might be, we're not necessarily screwed.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's ways we can get ourselves out of this, but it does take a bit of imagination. And imagining possibilities is what science fiction is good at.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about Dune a couple times. One of the things that comes across in a lot of Frank Herbert's novels and some of my favorite ones aren't part of his Dune series. The Dosadi experiment. If there's any science fiction readers among your listeners who want something that they might not have heard of before, the Dosadi experiment by Frank Herbert. He takes sort of the same kind of concept of the Fremen, this harsh climate environment, and what it does to a people's culture, and he takes that to like a greater extreme. What if there was like a hellhole of a planet, and what kind of culture would emerge on that hellhole planet? That just taking the possibilities and taking them to extreme, and whether it's like extreme and becomes like just a thought experiment. There's no pretending that I think this is going to happen. If it's that kind of science fiction, it's set 10,000 or 100,000 years in the future. It's a thought experiment about the human condition, right? Or some science fiction is just really tightly extrapolated. It's stuff that is super probable. And in Ministry for the Future, Kim Stanley Robinson's novel from a few years ago, he took a look at a near future and he said, I'm going to take an optimistic look, but like realistic. Like, the climate science is, he doesn't sweep that under the rug or assume there's going to be some magical technological fix. He says, all right, what would us shifting the way we're hemming and hawing about climate change, what would that look like to make that shift that we actually start to do something about it? And he tells that with real human characters and real human stories. And that's some of what I want to do in my writing. I've written some bleak things, and I talked about that story I wrote years ago where I was in that sort of feeling sorry for myself kind of place. But most of the stuff I write is really positive and hopeful, because I think that's what the world needs now. That doesn't mean being unrealistic or pie in the sky or assuming there's going to be technological solutions that just pop out of a hat and save the day for us. I think human beings are capable of doing a lot of positive things and being good people, and taking forward this civilization that I think now we don't have civilizations anymore. We have one civilization. We've got one global civilization. And I think it's possible for us to do better than we're doing. And I think we can. And I think eventually we will. Part of my job as a science fiction writer is to imagine that. And sometimes I imagine, what if we don't? But there's enough people writing that kind of science fiction that I don't need to spend much of my time imagining what if we get it all wrong. So I'm mostly trying to imagine what if we get it right, and what does it look like whether it's at the level of an individual person, one character in the story making the right decision, or it's a whole society or a whole culture. What does that look like? That's what I try and do with my fiction.
That's great. Okay, well, Lance, actually, what you described just then was right down the alley of the podcast. Really, it's kind of like, okay, we are surrounded by arguably tough times, challenge, all this stuff, and the podcast is about inspiring and uplifting, making every second count. And yeah, so I think you kind of said it really beautifully in a way that you can choose to go the path of optimism without it being pie in the sky or a delusion of sorts. Yeah, thanks. I mean, this has been a really great conversation, and I'm absolutely, yeah, so the link to your work will be in the show notes. And yeah, this is great. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you very much. It's been fun.
Okay, great. Represent for Canada. Enjoy that. Is Thunder Bay now really cold? Is it is it getting better? Warming up?
No, it's quite warm. It's up. It's around 8 or 9 or 10 degrees. All right, you're in a place where that's cold, right? No, that's beautiful. Winter's over.
I left Canada in the middle of, we decided in February, okay, screw this, Montreal's way too cold, we're out of here. So right now it's 30 degrees outside, and you're just like, no, it's warm, warm. It's like 8 degrees, which is winter in Hong Kong. I love it. Okay, well, on that buoyant note, have a fantastic evening, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
So is life really a gift? Really? Can you make every second count? That's the whole point of the podcast. So if you like what you've seen and you're inspired, because that really is my mission, then please give it a like, subscribe, and share.
Shooting it raw?
Yes, shooting it raw.